people that overcome the threat of nihilism by creating new values through a supposed will to power.
Realize.
Okay, first, just to explain what's meant by that. So the word Nietzsche is not being used here, but this is Nietzsche's philosophy in a nutshell. So overcome the threat of nihilism. So it's ironic because there's a lot of contemporary misunderstandings about things like existentialism. A lot of people tend to pop culturally conflate existentialism with nihilism, or they tend to assume existentialism is a nihilistic view, life has no meaning, etc., etc. And Nietzsche, unfortunately, tends to get lumped into this classification. And if you asked a lot, because it's interesting, because Nietzsche is one of the bigger name philosophers out there. He's a pretty big name philosopher. He's one of the few philosophers, modern philosophers, that like most people know his name or have at least heard of it before, even if they don't know much about him. And most people even have some kind of a loose understanding of who he is. But these common stereotypes and assumptions about Nietzsche tend to be things like association with his famous phrase from The Madman, "God is dead," which is often a misunderstood and misattributed quote that's taken to mean like, give me one sec. Sorry about that. One thing I found about streaming, man, you have got to have like a Gatorade or something on hand at all times, because you're like, your throat will dry out. Anyway, but that's a misattribution of the quote from Madman. Nietzsche's actually lamenting the death of God. He views it as a bad thing, although you get some edgy atheists today who might say, like, you might quote that phrase thinking it's some kind of a celebration or some proclamation of edgy atheism, and it's not. But also, so that people like say, oh, Nietzsche, that's like God is dead, and they'll think he's like some edgy atheist or something, or they'll associate him with nihilism and just this idea that like life has no meaning. But that is not Nietzsche's view at all. And in fact, Nietzsche believes life can be rich with value and meaning, but it's only really a meaningful life insofar as somebody has the strength of will to be creative and to create new value and new meaning as an extension of one's own will, rather than subordinating oneself to presupposed external systems of values. This is what's called two-world theories. So what does that mean? That means like things like classic Platonism, or if that's a little too unfamiliar to you, even just something like Christianity, right? A belief system that presupposes there are these external systems of values, an external sense of what's good and bad and right and wrong, and what's beautiful and ugly. And, an external, and then those external values are like what ground a system of meaning, meaningfulness. There's a contemporary thinker named Susan Wolf. I actually wrote in a conference on this once about how I think she has a very good argument about why, this is part of the problem with like self-created meaning contemporarily. You could argue a sort of like neo-Nietzscheanism is this problem that arises where it seems like kind of more subjectively, if you look at more like the phenomenology of meaning, or like the phenomenal experience of meaning, the experience of meaning is something that only really arises out of the perception that the evaluative ends towards which someone is moving in their life, or around which their life is ordered, are in fact objective. And there's something about saying there's nothing objectively valuable, there's nothing intrinsically and objectively valuable about this thing, this end that I've built my life around. There's something about saying that really does seem to undermine its ability to ground meaningfulness for the human condition. So two-world theories would be, though, just that there's objective external systems of values from which we derive our meaning in a kind of objective sense. I mean, meaning is sort of, it depends what you mean by objective and subjective. Like, you could say meaning is inherently subjective in the sense that like meaningfulness is a conscious mental experience. Therefore, it's the experience of a subject, right? Like the Gatorade bottle on my table doesn't experience meaning, only human agents and persons do, and subjects, right? Mental subjects. So if you want to say meaning is inherently subjective in that sense, that's fine. But it's the idea that the meaning, that subjective experience of meaning is still being grounded in external objects of value, right? But Nietzsche opposes all of this. So he's somewhat of a moral anti-realist in that regard, right? He would reject that there are like metaphysically real external objects of value. And in fact, he thinks that this is like the worst thing you can do is subordinate yourself to these external systems of value, because that's precisely what that is. That's exactly what that is. It's a slavishness. It's subordination. It's a slavishness. It's enslaving your will to evaluative ends that are predefined and predetermined by something beyond yourself. You're just but a slave to them at that point. So he greatly values the ability for somebody to have what he would regard as the strength of will, a will to power, and what is really therefore a will to create. The strength of will needed to create new value and new meaning as an extension of oneself, rather than as, some external system to subordinate themselves to. And so nihilism is actually exactly something that Nietzsche is trying to overcome. In fact, nihilism is effectively tantamount to what Nietzsche likens to what Nietzsche calls the last man. And in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche regards the last man as literally the most detestable thing somebody could be. And what is the last man? The last man is essentially your sort of hedonistic nihilist, or your nihilistic hedonist, right? The last man is he who says, "Oh, life's just totally, there's no objective value, there's no meaning to life, so I'm just going to lie around and soak up as much pleasure and avoid as much pain as possible, because why the hell not? There's no meaning to life, so I might as well just enjoy it, subjectively enjoy it as much as possible." That's the last man, your sort of hedonistic nihilism. Nietzsche absolutely detested that person. Again, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he literally refers to the last man as the absolute worst, most detestable thing a human being could be. And this is very much what Nietzsche was trying to overcome, right? I believe what is his line? Well, anyway, so this is what is being talked about here: to overcome the threat of nihilism, to overcome the threat of becoming the last man, to overcome the threat of just life has no, throwing your hands up in the air, life has no meaning, I'm just going to lie around and wallow in pleasure, because why the hell not? There's no meaning to anything else. Overcoming the threat of that by having this strength of will to, instead of it just kind of regressing into that absurdism, is instead having the strength of will to create new value and new meaning for yourself as an extension of yourself, to be so strong-willed that you straight up define what values and meaning are. And thus, Nietzsche's view is not nihilistic, again, to be clear. Nietzsche actually would greatly praise an existence that's like rich with meaning and value. It's just self-created, rather than either non-existent in a nihilistic view, or objective and external in a two-world theories kind of view. So that's what is being talked about here when in this meme. It says people that overcome the threat of nihilism by creating new values through a supposed will to power. Sorry, that was a bit of a lengthy explanation. I went on a bit of a tangent there, but let's continue.
Will to power.
Be like, if you are autistic, this is for you.
When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home and the lake of his home and went into...
Okay, so I actually kind of like that. So I kind of like that. That what was... It's that guy's kind of being quirky and different. He's like, if you're autistic, this is for you. If you ask me, I do have some problems with, I think the term autism has become severely overused and misused. And I think a lot of times people will use the word autistic to just refer to like someone who's like, oh, I'm just a little socially awkward and quirky. Autism's a serious like diagnostic label, and people throw that around too much. But anyway, without going down that rabbit hole, so this guy is like being kind of quirky and eccentric, and he's like, if you're autistic, this is for you. And it's a video of him, kind of dancing in public, and that was Thus Spoke Zarathustra on the screen. Here, let me go back.
When Zarathustra...
That's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. That's probably Nietzsche's most famous work. And it's one that heavily discusses the Übermensch, the Overman or Superman, as this next stage of human development that everyone's moving towards. And this is what defines the Übermensch, really, is being a creative artist, is giving stuff. So this is from an aphorism from the Gay Science, you know, what he called in the Gay Science, in an aphorism Nietzsche refers to as giving style to your character, right? To have this strength, this creativity about your spirit in a way that arises out of out of having a strong will to power in that sense. And therefore, this is why my line on this, I've written a couple papers on this, and my line on this is always like the will to power is effectively really just a will to create. That's really what the will to power is. It's like an artistic drive. Really, if you the Übermensch is the artist, is a creative artist like that. I'm actually publishing something in it's in a student journal, not like some national scholarly journal, but you know, I am publishing something on this this year's edition of a student journal on this exact subject. That this is like what the Übermensch fundamentally is, right? Is a creative artist. And then the Platonist, or somebody who adheres to two world theories, they're sort of like the imitative artist, right? They just imitate things. They imitate these external values that pre-exist them, and that therefore they can only ever just imitate, like again, with this slavishness about them. And so what does the point of this mean? Well, this is a quirky guy. I guess he's calling himself autistic, whatever. I don't know if that's true or not, but he's just being a quirky guy dancing in public. There's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. But the point is he's being creative. He's being artistic. He's giving style to his character. He's standing out amongst, you know, the plebs. He's standing out amongst them as like somebody more distinctive, more stylish, more creative, more artistic, and that there is a strength of will to be found here in somebody who does that. And so that's why the meme is like phrased the way it is. People that overcome the threat of nihilism by creating new values through supposed will to power. And then there's some quirky guy dancing on the street and being kind of quirky and artsy. It's kind of played up a little bit for laughs here, but there's a very serious point being made in Nietzschean philosophy. This is a very serious point in Nietzschean philosophy, that this is in fact the Übermensch, or you know, the way to move towards the Übermensch, really. This is what makes you a higher man in a Nietzschean sense, is having that this kind of giving style to one's character and being creative, you know, and artistic in that way, that there is a strength of will being exhibited here. And that, yes, this is exactly what therefore then overcomes the threat of nihilism. This is what overcomes the threat of meaninglessness, by daring to be so bold and creative as to make new value and new meaning. This guy's making meaning for himself. And even for others who, if he defines it through a strong enough will, people with weaker wills would just adhere to those values as a new system of external values, a new two-world theory to adhere to. But anyway, let's continue.
Zarathustra was 30 years old. He left his home and the lake of his home and went into...
Also, sorry, just to clarify, what was being said in the background there was the opening lines to Thus Spoke Zarathustra. When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he first came down from the... Anyway, it's not super important. Nietzsche in the non-existent afterlife being labeled a nihilist, when that's exactly what his entire life's work was meant to remedy. Exactly.
These lies are my name!
Exactly. That was funny for the same reason. That was funny for the exact same reason. That was funny for the exact same reason. Nietzsche hated nihilism, or at least what most people would today mean by nihilism, this kind of modern hedonistic nihilism, effectively what he called the last man. The last man, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, again, Nietzsche calls the last man the most detestable thing that anyone could possibly be. He hated it. His whole life's work, again, was about overcoming, just like the first meme we saw, overcoming that through your strength of will to create new value and meaning. And yet, as I pointed out, Nietzsche contemporarily commonly gets erroneously lumped in with nihilism And all existentialists tend to get, a lot of people don't understand. They just assume existentialism and nihilism are like synonymous or something. They just don't really know the difference. And so then they know Nietzsche has like something to broadly do with existentialism, or something to broadly do with like being a kind of edgy intellectual who rejects objective systems of values and meaning, which he does. But then they like take that to then mean, I guess, he's just this nihilist who thinks life has no meaning. But again, no, his whole life's, yeah, I like the way that his entire life's work was meant to remedy. It was meant to overcome that by through the will to power, through the will to create. Anyway, let's continue.
My name!
How Nietzsche expected the poor, oppressed, and genuinely enslaved to exercise their will to power. Ugh. Well, Nietzsche was very hierarchical, and he did believe, as we called it, the transvaluation of values, which is this idea that over time, you get plebes and you get poor people and people with weaker will who come along and attempt to flip the script on the higher men who define the systems of values and meaning as extension of their own will, and as extensions of themselves, and kind of try to flip the script and say, no, we're going to define it as an extension of ourselves. It's the poor, the bad, and on the genealogy of morals, there's an interesting point Nietzsche makes about how even the etymological origin of words like good and bad often tend to originate with terms that have socioeconomic ties. Like words for good are often connected to words like noble, and so the transvaluation of values would see like the poor, the bad, kind of flip the script and try to start redefining values in their own way. But this was a bad thing. Nietzsche regarded it as a hindrance to development towards the Übermensch. I think the point here is supposed to be that, like, for all of Nietzsche's appraisal of a strong will to power, he does have a very hierarchical system that just kind of screws over, people at the bottom. But let's continue. This is my idea of an Andrew Tate. Like, oh God. Oh God. Oh no.
I could have my...
That was pretty bad. I mean, I don't even know if I can expand on that. So it says, okay, guys, this is my idea of an Übermensch, and that's Andrew Tate. And then, like us, my teacher, and that is a prominent German political figure from the 1930s and 40s, the name of whom I am genuinely unsure I am allowed to say on stream due to both YouTube's and Twitch's terms of service. So I will avoid saying his name, but he was a prominent German political figure in the 1930s and 40s who was the head of a prominent German political party with right-wing populist leanings in the 1930s and 40s, who was also the de facto autocrat or de facto ruler of the German nation. Effective. I mean, it was the not. Almost said it. It was the. It was that edgy German political party was really the sovereign, to use Hobbesian language. It was really more of a partisan oligarchy or partisan aristocracy led by one party. But this man with the funny mustache was the leader of that party, right? So not a proper monarchy. A lot of people tend to conflate monarchy with dictatorship. And most dictatorships are in fact partisan oligarchies with a charismatic leader at the forefront of the party, but not inseparably one and the same with the public and the state. A true monarch is one and the same with the state. A true monarch has a complete union between the monarch's personal interest and the public's interest. A true monarch is inseparable from the state, is the sovereign of the state in one man, with one will, undivided. Many dictators are the rulers of political parties that themselves affect a certain like partisan oligarchy over the state. Anyway, that's just a point I like to make because I'm somewhat of a monarchist, and I don't like monarchy getting a bad name associated with certain dictatorships, which are not literally, like, ontologically, they are not monarchies. I mean, not in like a Hobbesian sense, at least. Anyway, so the point of this meme, I mean, I think it's just memeing on dudes who like to say things like this, like, oh yeah, Andrew Tate's like the Ubermensch. Well, okay, this is a problem I have, by the way. It's like, the Ubermensch is not something that like an individual man becomes. It's like, oh, I'm the Ubermensch and you're not. The Ubermensch is an idealized end that all of humanity is moving towards in a state of like constant Heraclitean flux, or a state of constant change and strife. And so it's, I don't like this game people sometimes play of like this person, this individual person is an Ubermensch and this individual person is not an Ubermensch. It doesn't really work like that. There is a hierarchical system of like you have higher men and lower men, and there's like a strength of will, and there's a hierarchy there, and some more define the process of how humanity moves towards the Ubermensch. But then again, to be fair, I guess it's more just saying, oh, Andrew Tate is maybe just, for the hypothetical person saying this, Andrew Tate is maybe just like this sort of visual imagery representative of what they think of the ideal of the Ubermensch, which is a little wacky to me, because I don't think Andrew Tate embodies many of those. I mean, I don't know. It's like Andrew Tate has like a certain strength of will about him and a certain I mean, you do have to grant he has a certain creativity about him, right? Like he's obviously achieved certain degrees of success, including in content creation, which, I'm obviously biased in favor of regarding online content creation as a genuinely creative, artistic medium. So like, there's a creativity about him. There's a certain strength of will about him. I mean, I can see the argument, but I don't know. For those, I don't know if anyone's been keeping up with some of the most recent news on Andrew Tate, but I just don't know if you want to go there trying to define him as an idealized end for all of humanity. And then we just jump from Andrew, and then this is what I don't. This is what I don't get. Well, okay. So then we jump to the funny mustache man from Germany in the 1930s and 40s. I guess, I don't know, is it just memeing on like people who talk like that about certain figures and certain, especially right-wing figures? Oh, that's Andrew Tate's the idea of my Ubermensch. Is it just saying like, this is the kind of person who might talk like that? Or is it, I mean, obviously, part of the popular, if someone has heard the word Ubermensch before, it often is in a more political context and in association with World War II era Germany and that political party and ideology, because that political group that German political group, the name of which I'm genuinely unsure I can mention directly on stream due to terms of service, they did reincorporate some of that Nietzschean language, like Ubermensch, but they incorporated it in a way Nietzsche would not have agreed with at all. Yeah, I don't have as much to say about this. Yeah, then they go, okay, so maybe that's the point of the meme. Okay, now I get the point of the meme. You mean like us, here's another right-wing figure that, okay, I get it now. I get the meme now. So they're saying, oh, Andrew Tate, that's my idea of the Ubermensch. They go, oh yeah, you mean like this other guy who was held up as an idea of the Ubermensch? And then, Germany lost that war pretty hard. And now here, that man is looking pathetic in the end. So now I get it. It's making fun of people who tend to lionize right-wing populist figures with that Nietzschean language. Yeah, things don't tend to end well for them, and they tend to not end up being the best representative of this idealized end for all of humanity to move towards. That is the Ubermensch, as you could argue is happening to Andrew Tate right now.
I could have my Gucci on. I could wear my...
Nietzsche every morning before getting rejected by the same girl again. So, yes, okay, right here. I don't know if you can see it. It says, he proposed to Lou Salome. Probably mispronouncing that. Proposed to this woman, the same woman, 3 times, and each time was rejected. Nietzsche famously was a 19th century incel. He famously severely struggled to find a wife, to get married. He had a lot of problems there. He was single and alone, and then by the time he was in his 50s, he lost his mind. We don't know how, and he actually spent the rest of his life in a mental institution, and died like absolutely insane. And we're not sure exactly how that happened. It used to be very popular, like even as recently as a few decades ago. A generation or two ago, it was still quite a popular, even scholarly view to believe that Nietzsche had syphilis, that he contracted. There's some speculation that when he was a young man or in college, he liked to get around. And that, for those who don't know, if you contract syphilis and it goes untreated, it can take years, decades even, but eventually, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, syphilis, as the syphilis infection goes untreated, it eventually begins to afflict your nervous system and your brain, and you develop severe dementia and completely lose your mind, and then end up dying. It's weird. It was like, in some ways, syphilis was almost like the AIDS of the pre-20th century. It was like the AIDS of the early modern period, because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and somebody can correct me on this if I am, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe syphilis actually is not. It was a New World disease. If I'm not mistaken, it actually came from indigenous populations in the Americas, and that's why syphilis didn't appear like back in the Middle Ages, for example. It wasn't until the early modern period, beginning 16th, 17th centuries and onwards, that you started getting these rampant syphilis epidemics back in Europe, especially in the bad parts of town, often passed around by ladies of the night. And that's starting the 16th, 17th centuries, and certainly 18th, 19th centuries. By the Romantic period. There's these famous paintings depicting syphilis. It's kind of freaking awful. But anyway, it was thought, up until relatively recently, it was still the mainstream view, even scholarly view, that Nietzsche had syphilis that eventually, later in his life progressed to neurodegenerative syphilis, and that was why he was insane. But that's actually, I'll confess, I don't know the whole story. I'd have to look this up to know exactly, but from what I understand, I remember talking to a professor about this. From what I understand, that's actually kind of now a dated view, and the most common view has moved away from that towards some form of an early onset dementia that hit him in his 50s. That actually did not necessarily have anything to do with syphilis. And it actually kind of makes sense, because circling back to this, so when Nietzsche was in college, he was a ladies' man, but then after college, and got syphilis, but then after college turned into a lifelong incel. It's like, no, I think Nietzsche was just kind of an incel. And, I think he really, so I don't know, it's just kind of hard to believe, what he's sleeping around with prostitutes. But then it's like, okay, if he's an incel, maybe does that mean, is he going out and hiring prostitutes because he's lonely? And, but anyway, this meme is just memeing on the fact that Nietzsche was a 19th century incel, basically. I don't know why I went on such a tangent.
We were tall, but even with nothing on, but I made you look.
I do like that. Whoever this guy is, he did get the Nietzsche stash down really well. Whoever this guy is, he has a pretty baller Nietzsche stash. He's gotten this shit down really, really well. I do like it, actually. I really like it. Maybe I should grow one.
I made you
Tell me why I'm stuck.
art is essentially the affirmation, the blessing, and the deification of existence. The will to power, note 853. The art Nietzsche was making. Okay. Wait.
As a virgin with rage, tell me why I so need a cute girl.
Okay. So first, this meme here is basically saying, okay, it's everything we were talking about earlier. This high premium Nietzsche places on the aesthetic justification for existence, on art and aesthetics, on the Übermensch as an artist, as a noble artist, first and foremost, who has the strength of will to create new value and meaning, rather than either subordinate himself to these presupposed external systems of values, or, in Nietzsche's view, or even worse, regress himself into this hedonistic nihilism. Oh, excuse me. This hedonistic nihilism of the last man. And instead, has the strength of will to dare to create, right? To be creative. So, and then this is so that's really just what this is capturing here. Just Nietzsche places such a high value on art for that reason. It's the affirmation, the blessing, the deification of existence. It is the justification of existence. It's the justification of one's existence. It's a huge topic in Nietzschean scholarship, the aesthetic justification of existence. Now, this is attempting to, I guess, hold this up against the idea that Nietzsche didn't make great art himself. I would disagree with that. I think he was obviously a very talented writer. I think Thus Spoke Zarathustra is not only one of his best philosophical works, it's like a genuine work of art, and it's well written. But I think what this may actually be making fun of more is so Nietzsche really liked music, and he was super into music, but but like he apparently wasn't good at it. Like, he played piano, but he, allegedly kind of sucked at it and just wasn't really a very good musician, even though he tended to often praise music as, one of the most sort of Übermensch forms of artistic expression there was, because it's non-representational, right? And what do we mean by that? Well, it's the most Dionysian. That's a bit of it's the most Dionysian kind of artistic expression there was. And what does that mean to say it's non-representative? Well, visual art is representational. It's representing ideas, right? So it's like a mere appearance. It's a mere appearance of a mere appearance. That's the issue is there's this sort of already the sort of phantasms we have in our mind are mere appearances of the external world. So Nietzsche took influence from Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer took a huge amount of influence from Kant. So there's kind of a Kantian phenomenal noumenal divide going on here. And it's the idea that the phantasms in our mind and the things we know about them, these are all our phenomenal experiences of reality, but not the things in of themselves. And what was I gonna say? Oh, well, so they're mere appearances of reality, right? They're not reality itself, but that is the thoughts in our minds. And then something like visual art, where you paint an image you've seen. Well, if the image you've seen is really more of just the more phenomenal appearance of reality and not the thing in of itself, so it's a mere appearance, then the painting of the thing you've seen is itself a mere appearance of a mere appearance. And so there's these Apollinian, or that means these abstracted sort of representational attempts at making rational and coherent and intelligible these appearances of reality, but that's getting away from the sort of underlying unintelligible, the underlying chaotic, the underlying primal oneness, the underlying primal nature of the things in of themselves. And so the reason why music was Nietzsche had such a high view of music was because, as he would claim, music is not representational in that way. It's not like an image of an image, right? It's just raw sound and movement, and therefore it's more Dionysian, it's more primal, it's more in touch with the oneness of nature. Here's the thing, though, is I think Nietzsche's actually wrong about that. I think Nietzsche's actually wrong to consider music non-representational. I think music is very representational in various ways. There's that punk rocker Iggy Pop. he once gave like an interview in the 80s where he was talking about when he first got into the punk scene. And he said at the time when he was just like 18, 19, 20, at the time he was working in a chop shop, an automobile shop. And he was constantly surrounded by metallic screeching and all these very loud screeching noises. And he said why he was drawn to the punk scene and the kind of music he started wanting to get involved with when he started doing, when he started getting into garage bands and stuff, was precisely because he was interested in capturing that aesthetic experience of like existing in such a chaotic space as like a chop shop or an automobile shop and capturing some of those same sounds. That is representational in music. That is representational music. That is using music to capture an appearance of reality aesthetically, right? Those sounds are actually like representing something. You know, so that's just an example, but there's plenty of others. In the Velvet Underground, one of their famous songs called Heroin, which is, you guessed it, about doing heroin. And it's actually a very beautiful song. It's one of the most beautiful rock songs I've ever heard. I'd really recommend it. But the song is, if you listen to the drummer, Nico, the drum, especially the bass drum, is meant to simulate a heartbeat throughout the song. And you can hear the song experiments with acceleration and deceleration. So in addition to having a sort of proto loud soft dynamic, the song will have this, it'll be slow, like somebody like, you know, numbed out on heroin or opioids, very slow, sedated, and it's a slow heartbeat, dun, 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 done, right? And then when the chorus picks up and the song speeds up really fast, and you'll actually hear the bass start to accelerate a little, and then it gets really fast. It's meant to simulate like the sound of a heart, right? And like your heart when you're numbed out on heroin, and then heroin wears off, and then you go get more, and there's an excitement building, and your heart starts pounding and pounding until you do it again, and then it slows down, right? So again, I'm just using that as an example of representational music, of artistic representation in music. Just because it's not visual representation doesn't mean it's not representation. And just because like, this Apollonian dream world of like rendering things intelligible, you know, like visual art does that most obviously by most literally being a mere appearance of a mere appearance, at least in the Nietzschean view, right? But it's to say, just because music doesn't have a visual image attached to it doesn't mean it doesn't have imagery. It doesn't mean it doesn't have, you know, again, like a mere appearance of reality that's being represented by it. So I just think that's a point that Nietzsche's super wrong about when it comes to music. But this is what I think the point of this meme is. He plays such a high premium on art, although, and then he especially really loved music, but then he kind of sucked at music himself.
My age.
We made 50 people read Nietzsche with no Reddit, and this was their reaction. Just everybody's depressed. Well, remember, Nietzsche was all about overcoming the threat of nihilism. So perhaps a Nietzschean would say, if you're really that depressed by reading Nietzsche, perhaps it's because you're one of the lower men without the strength of will necessary to be strong enough to create new value and meaning. In other words, you're like what he describes as a piece of bark adrift in a river, you know, unable to affect your directedness in life, just simply shaped and dragged along by the current. So if you're so bothered by Nietzsche's philosophy, perhaps it's precisely because you're one of those lesser men. To take a shot back at him. I hate you ruined my life. You literally never read my book. It's true. True. I mean, just that there's some people who get like that about Nietzsche.
People who do the same thing but only offer hype moments and aura.
Be like,
Oh, Albert Camus. Oh no. Oh no. Oh. Yeah, so guys, I do like this one just because I don't like Camus anywhere near as much as Nietzsche. So Camus was an existentialist as well. I don't agree with the way he framed it, like people who do the same thing but like without as much horror or whatever. It's because Camus' view was that life is absurd and truly meaningless and unintelligible, and that any attempt at trying to render meaning unto the world or make sense of it is philosophical suicide and without like meaning. And so it's like, you know, so his whole view was about the idea of, he wrote the myth of Sisyphus, and it was about the idea of like Sisyphus has two choices. He can roll the boulder up the hill for all of eternity while being miserable about it and longing for something more, or he can roll the boulder up the hill for all of eternity with a smile on his face while reveling in its meaninglessness. And so as the idea was like the only real point to life is just to embrace its absurdity and meaninglessness. But you know, this is totally at odds with Nietzsche's view, to be clear. This is why Nietzsche is way more based. If you're going to be an existentialist, just be a Nietzschean. If you want to be an edgy existentialist, and I deal with a lot of edgy existentialists, when I was at my conference earlier this year, there were so many there because it was a more continental-oriented conference, and there were so many like loser existentialists that were dressed like super casual for an academic conference and just looking like losers, and you know, I have issues with the whole edgy existentialism thing and the way it's kind of polluted more continental oriented philosophical scholarship, but like at the same time, you know, there are aspects of it I respect and agree with, and like I kind of like Kierkegaard, and I kind of like Nietzsche, and I think Nietzsche is way more based than Albert Camus. Albert Camus is just like embrace the absurd. Nietzsche's like, no, overcome it and create new value and meaning. Let's be Ubermensch. Let's be artists. Let's create something. Let's not just revel in it and like the fact that there is nothing. There's just something that's just far more audacious and respectable about that. I mean, come on. What self-respecting man wouldn't far rather be the artist, the creative artist that is the Ubermensch, rather be that than he would the absurd, tragic hero that is Sisyphus? I mean, come on. If you could be the creative artist that is the Ubermensch, or you could be Sisyphus, eternally rolling the boulder up the hill for all eternity, but the more heroic Sisyphus who does so with a smile on his face. I mean, which one of those two is far more romantic, far more laudable? The based Ubermensch, that's who. So if we're going to be existentialists, let's just be frickin' Nietzscheans. That's how I've always felt about it. I'm not on board totally with existentialism, but like there's aspects of it that are, I get why it's appealing and alluring but like if we are going to go that route, if we're just going to be, all right, let's just be edgy existentialists. If we're going to go that route, dude, just be a Nietzschean. Forget Albert Camus. Forget the absurd and embracing the absurd. Forget that. Just be a based Nietzschean Ubermensch. Anyway, I do like the meme of the age you can say. So yeah, that's a reference to Albert Camus. Had some, I'll just leave it at here. Some controversial aspects of his personal life. So that is funny. Treat me like a stranger and I feel so loved. Yeah, that's one of Camus' most famous books, is The Stranger. Yeah, that's Sisyphus. That's Sisyphus.
I didn't really read anything about Camus.
You know, yeah. That was a good video. I like that. I really like that. I think I'm gonna wrap it up here. It doesn't really look like I actually got any live viewers tonight. Oh well. You win some, you lose some. That's what I've found when it comes to the algorithm. This'll at least make for some like cuts and stuff I can make for my YouTube channel. And yeah, so I'm just going to end it there. Have a good night, everybody. If you like my philosophical content and wish to see more of it, help get my channel off the ground by remembering to like, share, comment, and subscribe.